Good evening. Welcome back to the study of Daniel. This is session 23. We will still be in chapter 8. So if you want to get your Bible and turn to that chapter, got a little bit of time. I'm outside right now. I'm down in Cocoa Beach, and so you may hear some sounds here and there, but that's okay. Just a beautiful evening. And just thought I would do this sitting out here out by the ocean. So as we kind of remember back to last session, the thing that we found was this ram and this goat, and this ram obviously was representative of the Medo-Persian Empire, and then we had this goat with this single horn that came upon it and actually destroyed it, and so that horn represents the Greek Empire. That goat represents the Greek Empire, with that horn representing Alexander the Great. So I wanted to start reading in verse 8 right now. So if we would go to chapter 8, verse 8, it says, "Therefore the male goat grew very, very great. But when he became strong, the large horn was broken, and in its place of it was 4 noble ones came up towards the 4 winds of heaven." But here in 8, it tells us that the large horn was broken, and that represents the death of Alexander the Great. And whenever he died, his kingdom was split up between his 4 major generals, and they pretty much kind of went their own way, all wanting to be, obviously their own king. And they went in their 4 different directions, which we've talked about. So let's look at verse 9. It says this: "And out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the glorious land." Now there is a lot going on here in verse 9. This little horn that it's talking about here in this verse, there's a lot of meaning to it. First of all, this is a precursor. It kind of gives us a snapshot of the coming Antichrist, okay? But this horn that came up out of one of the 4 was actually the horn that it came out of was the Seleucid Empire, and out of the Seleucid Empire, which actually became probably the greatest of the 4, was this king that you may have heard of before, named Antiochus Epiphanes. And so Antiochus Epiphanes ruled really from 175 to 164 BC whenever he died. But Antiochus was very cruel, and we're going to look at a lot about him tonight. He was one that wanted to conquer the world, and he was on his way to doing that until the Romans kind of shut him down. And so if we'll go back here and look at 9, it said that that it grew exceedingly great towards the south and towards the east and towards the glorious land. So whenever he was shut down by the Romans, his focus went towards Jerusalem and towards the Judea, and that's exactly where he went after he was stopped. So when we see the glorious land is representative of Jerusalem. So he turned his focus there, and he was very cruel. Whenever they sieged Jerusalem, they killed over 80,000 Jews, and they sold another 40,000 into slavery. Let's look on, and we're going to see some of his aftermath. It says, "And it grew up to a host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them." Okay, so it says it grew up to the host of heaven. So he started growing very strong, and his focus went towards those of heaven. So that would be the believers, the Jews. And it says that he trampled on them. And I just referenced how he had killed 80,000 Jews and sold 40,000 into slavery. And so he trampled them down, and he did all sorts of very wicked things. One of the things that Antiochus tried to do is he wanted to destroy their faith. He was Greek, and he wanted the Hellenistic culture to be there, and he tried to force the Greek cult worship and culture on the Jews. He outlawed the observance of the Sabbath, and the reading of the Torah. Matter of fact, he went and he tried to find every Torah that he could find, and he burnt them up, and just tried to destroy everything that he possibly could that had anything to do with the Jewish culture. Matter of fact, he also passed really a law in which if anybody was caught observing any of the Jewish tradition, that it could be punishable by death. And we knew that he did this. He did a lot of things just to try to insult the Jews. One of the things that he did was he instituted some games around Jerusalem, in which he actually took the priest and made them play games, but they had to do it in front of the temple, and they did it naked. And that was just to totally humiliate them. The other thing that he did was he outlawed the practice of circumcision. There's a story that is told of how there were two mothers that had their boys circumcised. When he found out about this, he had both of the babies killed. He hung them around their mother's neck and made the mothers kind of march through Jerusalem, marched them up on top of one of the walls, and then cast them down and killed them in front. So if you can imagine having your baby killed in front of you, but even worse than that, hung around your neck, and then you had to walk through the city streets. So that was one occurrence. Another one that he did was he had heard of a family that was observing some Jewish tradition, and this mother had 7 sons, and so Antiochus brought all 7 boys in front of him, had their tongues cut out, and then put them on basically a slab and roasted each one of them one at a time, very slowly, in front of their mother. And then after that, he had the mother killed. So this is a very wicked man that we're talking about. So Antiochus was doing all this, trying to scare, obviously, the Jews. And we know that because it tells us that in 10 it says, and it grew up to the host of heavens and cast down some of the host. Now, this cast down means several things. People were given the opportunity to turn away from the Jewish tradition and to adhere to this Hellenistic culture, and I'm sure many did, basically out of self-preservation. They did that, and so they turned from their knowledge of God into pagan worship because they were trying to save themselves. And so, Antiochus, that name Antiochus means God manifest, and Antiochus Epiphany means the madman. And actually what had happened on that is that this was a name that the Jews gave Antiochus, because it was actually Antiochus the Fourth, and then they put Epiphanes at the end because he was a madman. And so let's look at verse 11. It says, he even exalted himself as high as the prince of hosts. And by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. So Antiochus here in 11, he says that he exalted himself as high as the prince of hosts, meaning God, and that he ended the sacrifices that were occurring in the temple. He also did away with any kind of temple worship. And in its place, he actually wanted his worship of the Greek gods to take place. When the Bible talks about the desecration of the temple, and this is really what we're talking about right here, what Antiochus did was, just as another insult to the Jews, is that he took a pig into the temple. And if you know anything about Jewish tradition, that's an unclean animal. And he took it into this temple. He slit its throat and then threw the blood all over the temple. And he did that. He was allowed to do that. God allowed him to do that. And we're going to see that. And this was really probably one of the worst things that could happen to a Jew, is having this unclean animal go into this temple. And so, I think one of the things that we have to remember as we're looking here and realizing that this is Daniel, is that Daniel would have struggled with this, knowing what his people was going to have to endure. Remember, This vision came to him about 10 years prior to so much of this happening, and this is stuff that he had to uh, that he had to deal with, and so I'm sure it was very, very troubling to him. So let's look at verse 12. It says this: because of transgressions, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily sacrifices, and he cast truth down to the ground. He did all this and prospered. Now, as we look at this, in verse 12, it says, because of transgressions. Speaking of those that chose to turn from God for self-preservation, and we just talked about that those that chose to do that he cast truth down. And this is kind of giving us a glimpse of what the Antichrist is going to do. The Antichrist is going to be very prolific with his ability to speak, and he is going to have a lot of answers. Then he is going to become very wicked. And so what I want you to see right now is the wickedness of Antiochus is kind of a precursor to what we are going to see with the Antichrist later on. And so, it tells us here in 12 that he did all this and prospered. Okay, now this could be a little confusing to you, but what you need to understand is the prospering that they're talking about is that is what God is allowing to have happen at this point in time. Remember, we're still dealing with the time of the Gentile, and God is using the Gentiles as a wrath upon the Jews. And so now we're going to start seeing it turn just a little bit. Okay, so let's look at verse 13. It says this: then I heard a holy one speaking. That holy one's an angel. And another holy one said to that certain one who was speaking, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgressions of desolation, the giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? So basically, this angel is speaking and saying, how long is God going to allow the temple to be desecrated, and how long is he going to allow his people to be trampled underfoot? We know from history, there's a book, it's not in the canonization of the Bible, but it's called the First Maccabees, that tells us that there was altars of Zeus that Antiochus brought and placed inside the Jewish temple, and also he had altars spread out around Jerusalem. So that is when he's talked about the transgression of desolation, that is one of the things he's speaking of, along with obviously, what we saw earlier with the pig. And then he goes on to speak about, how long is he going to allow God's people to be trampled? And so then we look at verse 14 and we get a very specific answer. And he said to me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. So here we go. God had spoken about days were numbered. And so he allowed Antiochus, basically 2,300 days was the length of his reign. And really this is speaking also of 2,300 evening and morning sacrifices that would have occurred within the temple that he was going to allow Antiochus to disrupt. But from this desolation of the temple, there is going to be the Maccabee revolt that is going to take place. Finally, the Jews had had enough through the prodding of God, and there was a person that is spoken of by the name of Judas Maccabeus, who is also known as Judas the Hammer, and he was one that really helped lead the revolt of the Jews in 165 BC. And so God used a man to destroy Antiochus or his kingdom, but it's not found in the Bible. Doing something just a little different. As I was recording, this one went a little long, so I decided to split it up. So that's why you're seeing a different picture here. But where we're going to end it at tonight is here in verse 14, where it talks about how long is it going to be. And these two angels are speaking, and we just mentioned Judas Maccabeus, which is one of the Maccabeans, and really helped lead the revolt. So I think it's a great place for us to stop until next time, and just know that we love you, and if there's anything that we can do to help you, we're here and we want to help in any way that we can. So with that being said tonight, good night, God bless, until next time.